It's really a pleasure to introduce Kathryn. I haven't even thought about how long I've known Kathryn, but I remember she came as an undergraduate. It's got to be 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. Okay, okay, 9 years ago. Wow, time flies. And I had the opportunity of meeting her. I think it was after when you were going to Zimbabwe is when I probably first met Kathryn, and then I remember she took a class, a couple of classes, I think, from me. But she was such a light as a student, and such a great example, and so eager to get out into places where some people are a little intimidated to go, particularly, when you're young, and but not Kathryn. She's while she worked for us, she ended up, after being a student and going on several field studies, she ended up working for us, and it was just such a delight to have her. She's got an amazing personality. In fact, I was just thinking, sorry, I'll give you one little short one. I was actually eating lunch behind those doors right there one day, and I could hear Kathryn and Suze. Now, Suze Johnson, they were best friends. In fact, they used to talk about they were always married, and they'd refer to each other as their wife, and stuff like that. And when they would get together, there was just an energy in the room that was amazing. And I was sitting here eating my lunch, and I could hear Kathryn and Suze, and they were laughing and talking, and I thought, wow, they must be here in the conference room. So when I finished my lunch, I could still hear them talking, and I opened the door and looked in here, and nobody was here. And so I started down the hall, and I was looking for them. You know where they were at? They were down in 204, which is the furthermost office. You couldn't get any further from this spot in this building. And there's like 4 closed doors between here and there. And they were sitting in there talking. We figured out it was coming through the ventilation system, but they were having such a good time. Kathryn, let me just, right now, presently, she's a clinical social worker at American Fork Hospital. She also has been working with Mothers Without Border. They go all over, but Zambia has been the area where she is focused more. And so she's been working with them in her latest international experiences in 2005, 6, and most recently, just this last year, has been in Zambia. She also, while she was here at BYU, she completed an internship for UNICEF in the Philippines, as well as she worked with Lobok Literacy Program, which is now called Pro Literacy. For those of you who know that, it's a very large literacy NGO, and that was in Cambodia. And I can also remember the discussions of sweatshops in Cambodia with Blaine Johnson and some of the great discussions we've had. She originally went on a field study she was in Zimbabwe, and she also was a facilitator and a student in South Africa. So she had an amazing amount of international experience and involved heavy with the development scene here at BYU for those years. And we're just really appreciative that you would come back and talk to us, Kathryn, and I'll turn the time now over to her.
Dave said Suze was called my wife and vice versa. And I guess only at BYU you could say that and not have a lot of misconceptions. So I need you to know my husband's in the back. And it's not Suze. It's a real husband. But Suze was a great friend. And actually, Suze and I met on a field study in South Africa. And through a series of what I thought at the time was unfortunate events I was planning to go to Zimbabwe and got rerouted in Germany, and all kinds of things happened. But Suze and I ended up in South Africa together, and I'll talk a little bit about some of our experiences there. But she has just been such a wonderful friend, and really through international study programs, I think that's probably one of the best things that's happened to me is I have some just very close friends that even 9 years later we're still in touch, and I see them and just like sisters. So that's been a wonderful thing. Now, I don't like this podium, but they tell me that I have to stand here for the microphone. So I hope that you'll just imagine us sitting around under a musasa tree in Africa talking about some of these things, drinking well, they don't have caffeine-free Coke. You just drink bottled Coke when you're abroad. I'm sorry. That's the way it is. Even if you're a BYU student, I don't know, maybe I'm letting out secrets I shouldn't. But I hope that you'll imagine us there rather than in this more formal classroom setting, because that's really what I want to talk to you about, some of the things that, experiences that I've had abroad and how that's led me to my career now and some of the things that I'm involved with now. So just kind of a brief overview of some of the things. Dave gave an overview of the experiences and programs that I went on while I was here a student. But just to give you a little bit more information, the first program I went on was in 1999. I went to Zimbabwe it was a study abroad, but now they've turned it into more of the volunteer program. So there was a professor who went and about 15 students. We were involved with a number of volunteer activities, working at orphanages and schools, doing educational kinds of things with students and children there. And then we also went to a lot of the cultural and historical sites in Zimbabwe. So we traveled all over Zimbabwe. We also had the opportunity to enjoy the natural beauty in Zimbabwe and went backpacking for a couple of weeks through the Eastern Highlands and also went to Victoria Falls. So this was a great introduction for me to international study programs. And actually this program was where when I was mentioning my close friends that I've had through these experiences, a very close friend I met on this, we said that we were twins in the pre-existence because we liked so many of the same things, and we just happened to meet in Zimbabwe. So it was a great experience, and this was really the first place where I had my introduction to the plight of street children. Zimbabwe, it was the first time I had ever been outside of the United States, and I grew up in Pleasant Grove, Utah. So I didn't even know that poverty existed really till I was a senior in high school, and we went to a trailer court in Pleasant Grove, and that really opened my eyes. So here I am, 2 years after graduating from high school. I've spent my whole life in Pleasant Grove, and now I'm on a plane to Zimbabwe. So those first few weeks and months were filled with just so many emotions. It's hard to even describe, but one thing that really touched and influenced me was the plight of street children. So in Pleasant Grove, I had never been approached by a street child. I'd been to Salt Lake, of course, and there were people there, but never children. And so this was a very interesting situation for me. My first days in Zimbabwe, I remember we were in the capital city of Harare, and street children would approach me. And I was so uncomfortable with that situation because I didn't know what to do. I was so uncomfortable with it. So first few days, I came up with this, what I thought was a very great plan, and I took some Zimbabwe coins, which when I was there, the exchange rate was 1 to 35. Now it's 1 to 700,000 and going up by the day. But their economy is in a really difficult situation. But then it was 1 to 35. So even a few Zimbabwean coins, it was less than a nickel. I mean, I had these 1 Zim coins that were less than a nickel. So when street children would approach me, I would just give them some coins, a few coins. I wouldn't look at them because that was just too hard for me. It was too much for me to look in the eyes of these children. And so what I would do, I would just throw a few coins in the dishes they were holding out. Well, I think it was Nelson Mandela who said, indifference is worse than hatred, because at least if you hate me, you acknowledge that I exist. And if you're indifferent to me, you're not even acknowledging my existence. Essentially, that's what I was doing to these street children. It was so difficult for me and so uncomfortable of a situation that I was saying, here's some coins. Really, they're not worth anything to me, really much. I mean, 5 cents, maybe. But I'm doing it so that you'll just leave me alone because I'm uncomfortable with this. And I remember one time I was going through my routine. I'd been there a few days, and I saw the corner of my eye, one of the street children look at me like, are you serious? Are you kidding me? Like, this is it? I mean, some tourist she is. And I started to that was really the beginning of when I really started to think about things and think about these children who were living and eating on the streets and what that meant for them. And so I changed my strategy. I mean, I changed my plan several times while I was in Zimbabwe, just grappling for anything that would bring some resolution to this struggle I had with the plight of street children. And so towards the middle and end, what I would do is while we were waiting for the bus, when you have 15 students and you're in Africa and you say a time to meet, usually there's some stragglers, so you end up waiting. So I would spend some time visiting with the children, street children, either the children that were asking for money or selling items, just learning their stories. I suddenly didn't feel a need to give them something that was really meaningless to me, but really to learn their stories. And so that really began for me this engagement with street children that continued on while I was in South Africa. So I spent those 4 months in Zimbabwe, and like Dave said, I came home and worked as a facilitator. I was supposed to go back to Zimbabwe, but because of the political situation in Zimbabwe at the time, we actually changed our plans and went to South Africa instead. So then in 2000, I went to South Africa, and there we worked at a shelter for street children. And the shelter was open from 8 in the morning till 1 in the afternoon. So we would go and help prepare breakfast, and then the children were supposed to do educational activities. Now, the kids that came to the shelter, they were from the ages of 6 to about 18. So there was quite a range of ages, and also their educational level was quite varied. Plus, you've got to remember, these children are living on the street 19 hours of the day. And street life is tough, and it's hard, and it's brutal. And so these are children who are coming in. Many of them had been in fights the night before. Drug use was prevalent, crime, all kinds of things. And then we're supposed to do educational activities. Now, Suze was the other intern with me, and so there were some women who were running the shelter, and they didn't really know what was going on either. So they would leave Suze and I with 25 street children for 3 or 4 hours at a time to do activities. So this was a great, again, learning experience for me, where I really got to learn the stories and the life and the history of these children, and again, just grappling for ways to help them, to give them any sort of confidence or desire to have something different than the life that they had. And so those were great hours that we spent at that shelter. And as part of it, I also did research it was a field study. So the work that we did there was really a way to gain research and to learn about the life of street children, and really to think about what are some of the solutions and what are some of the things that are going to help these children. And it's different when you're reading a textbook, and then different when you're sitting with a child who you can look into his eyes and see the potential that he has, and wondering, how do I bridge this gap? How do I help this child who's grown up and lived in poverty bridge this gap between where he is now and where I know he can be, where I can see, and where does he get those resources to make that transition? So it was a great, again, experience to really think about those things. I don't know that I came home with any more answers than I went with. Probably I had more questions. And I see some of you shaking your heads. I think you'll know that as you spend more time abroad, rather than more answers, you usually come home with more questions. And that certainly has been the case for me, because you become more involved in the lives of these children, and then have more questions. So then I came home. From that, I was still working in international study programs, and so then the next summer, I went to the Philippines and worked with UNICEF. And I had the opportunity to work with a man named Paul Mosolina, and he was a wonderful mentor and advocate for children. And specifically, again, I worked with street children because of my interest there that had been sparked in Zimbabwe. So part of my time, I split my time with UNICEF. Part of the time I worked with one of their local partner organizations. It was an organization called Pangarap. And it's a shelter and drop-in center for boys who are living on the streets. So part of their facility had a long-term residential center where the boys actually lived and went to school. And then part of it was a drop-in center while they had the social worker would try to find family or find other options for care for these boys. And then if no other options were available, they would put them in the residential center. Mr. Mosolina was such a great mentor. Just to give you a little bit of background about him, he actually for he had his master's degree, so for his thesis research, he decided to do a participant observation study, and he worked in Subic Bay, which was where there was an American base there, and so there was quite a bit of sexual exploitation that was going on in that area. So what he did was he got a job as a waiter in one of the bars that was frequented by American servicemen, and then he did kind of undercover research as part of it, and he wrote this terrific paper about his experiences there. So he was just such a wonderful mentor for me, and he actually received an award. He himself is Catholic, but he received an award from the LDS Church. It was a national award that was given for his work with preserving families and advocating for children. So that was, again, a great experience, and had some great experiences working with, again, street children. This time it was all boys and in the Philippines, which brought some different cultural conditions and insights different than had been in Zimbabwe. And then during that same time period, I traveled to Cambodia, and that was with Blaine Johnson. He was a student here for a long time. I don't know. Has he graduated yet? Did he finish his field work? I don't know. Anyway, so we were there. We were working for an organization called Lobok Literacy, which is now Pro Literacy. And we were doing training in methodology that engages learners to take an active role in making changes in their own community. So we worked with a partner organization there and trained their staff so that they could then go out into rural areas and in villages and also train others. And part of it was there is a literacy component to that, but probably the biggest component that I felt the strongest about was this empowering people in their own community to make changes. So those were some of the experiences that I had here, and obviously those experiences have very much impacted what I do now, not only in my professional career, but also my personal life. When Dave asked me to come talk here, as I thought back on the experiences that I've had, I thought, it's really hard to separate out and to dissect what specific skills or knowledge or insight I gained as part of the international stay programs that I was on, because it seems like those things are so ingrained and now threaded into who I am that to separate those things out has been a little bit difficult, but it's been nice and a great opportunity to reflect on those experiences and how they've affected me now. So just to give you some information about when I graduated, some of the opportunities and job offers that I had in international studies and related fields, so that you'll know at least some of the possibilities that are available. So for international job opportunities, when I first graduated from graduate school, I was offered a position doing some research with Finca. It was an 8-week program that they had people go out and doing research on microcredit loans and how their microcredit lending institution was working. So I was offered to go to Zambia and Malawi. I actually didn't go. These first two I didn't do, but I just wanted to let you know what's out there. The second was a few years after I graduated. Pro Literacy, who I'd gone to Cambodia with, they were looking for a program developer and trainer to work in Southeast Asia and Africa, which would mean spending 3 to 4 months out of the year traveling to Southeast Asia and Africa. Because of other career decisions that I had made and other things that I decided in my life, I decided not to take that opportunity. But again, just another wonderful opportunity. Pro Literacy is a great organization. They're doing wonderful things to empower people in their own communities. And so that was, again, another opportunity. Now, the third one is something that I am doing currently, and that is working with Mothers Without Borders as a volunteer coordinator. So we take teams of volunteers to Zambia 3 to 4 times a year, and I usually will go on, for the last 3 years, I've gone on once a year, have taken a group of volunteers down to do some volunteer work in Zambia. So this picture actually is from our most recent trip to Zambia. In April, we went down. And Mothers Without Borders, one thing that I really like about Mothers Without Borders, I don't know if I should say this in such a public setting, but since we're under a Musasa tree and we're in Zambia, that doesn't matter, right? So one thing that really, when I was a student here, that really bothered me was these 2 or 3 week expedition volunteer experiences where you go for just a couple weeks. Because I thought, in 2 weeks, people don't really get a good feel for what's going on. But I actually have found that volunteers can have a really great experience in a couple weeks if there's some things in place. And one thing that I really like about Mothers Without Borders is they have local staff who are doing projects all year round. And so when we take a group of volunteers in, we're really just supplementing and adding to the projects that are really ongoing all year round. So one project that we have that's ongoing all year round is working with a community organization called Bofuano. And Bofuano, I'll talk about them in a minute, but they have several programs. And one program that they had is helping widows who are caring for orphaned and vulnerable children. So this grandmother, she's 80 plus, she's in her 80s, and her children have all died and left her with very young children to care for. So you can imagine at 83, it's difficult to get a job. Impossible, really. Difficult anyway when you're young and working well and there's over 50% unemployment rate. Difficult to find a job. When you're 83, essentially impossible. So here's this grandmother who's left to care for her grandchildren, and she's doing the very best she can. the grandmothers in sub-Saharan Africa are truly amazing because they step in and do things when there is no one else, when there's no government support and there's no extended family support. These grandmothers are stepping in. So this particular grandmother, she was living with her 5 or 6 grandchildren, young children, in a shelter that was made with, you know, those plastic swimming pools? That was their roof. I have no idea where they found it. They did have a small garden, and the garden fence was made of big foam pieces that flip-flops had been cut out of in a factory. That was the fence. And then the walls were just tarps. And so in the rainy season, they had no protection from the rain. I mean, an upside-down swimming pool just really wasn't cutting it for them. And so Buofano, in conjunction with Mothers Without Borders, helped her to build a shelter that would be safe. You can't really see her home, but you can see the front wall of it. You can see it's nothing fancy. It's a 3-room cemented walls, cement floor, but she was able to lock her door, and so she felt safe with her children. And so that made all the difference for her. She didn't need to have plush carpet, and she just wanted a roof over her head so she could keep the rain out and a lock so she could keep the kids safe. So she's the Ambuya, and she's a wonderful lady. The first time I went to visit her, Buofano was helping to provide food for them. So they would give them some maize each month so that they could have food. So those are those are just a few of the things that Buofano does, and we partner with them as Mothers Without Borders. And the first time we went to see her, she hadn't eaten for 3 days because Buofano ran out of funding. They didn't have enough maize to distribute, so they had to give it to families who hadn't had food subsistence for that long. So we had a few peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in the car and in the bus, and so we gave her some sandwiches, and she ate those sandwiches in about 3 bites, and she doesn't have any teeth. So it was quite a difficult experience, again, grappling for what can be done here. So that's the Ambuya. And then the 2 other Africans that you see there, Josephine and Webster, they are Mothers Without Borders staff and do a wonderful and excellent job of helping to care for vulnerable and orphan children in Zambia, working day in and day out, doing some really difficult things. And then the good-looking guy is John, my husband, who wasn't my husband then. But so that's some of what we do now. So again, currently, I also work as a licensed clinical social worker at American Fork Hospital. And so I'll talk in a minute about some of the ways that my international experiences have tied in even to the work that I do at American Fork Hospital as a social worker. I'm involved with all kinds of things there: discharge planning, crisis intervention, grief counseling, end-of-life care, and anything else the nurses don't know what to do with. They call a social worker usually. And then again, a volunteer coordinator, and there's a picture of the team that we took this year. And one of the things that we're involved with in Mothers Without Borders is creating a community center that will help to care not only for vulnerable and orphan children, but also for widows and people in the community that need vocational training, and there will be quite a resource center. So that's the land, and that's the old home. But they've built some new structures since then, but that's the team. So I hope for a minute that you'll forgive me from kind of some of the academic part of it, and just something that I've been thinking about recently, and specifically thought about during this last time when we were in Zambia, and something that I thought as students in international development or students in whatever field you're studying, and obvious with interest in international types of things, that I've been thinking about as I prepared this, and that is that, and I'm sure in previous weeks and in upcoming weeks, you will hear from a lot of graduates, a lot of students who have been sitting maybe in the same seats where you are, and have gone on and done different things with their lives. I think there have been times in my life where I've felt pressure only from myself to follow or do the path of another. And I guess one thing I've come to realize is that we each have our own path and our own journey. If I felt that I needed to do the same things as Dave Schuler or Dr. Ginny Roby, I would wake up with guilt every day because they're doing amazing things. But what I've come to realize is that that's not my journey. That's their journey, and I'm so grateful that they're on that journey. I had a girl a couple months ago tell me that she goes 2 or 3 times a week to the animal shelter and helps take care of the abandoned cats at the animal shelter. So she helps feed the cats, and she helps change the litter boxes and bathe the cat. I mean, I don't even know if you can bathe a cat, really, because I've never been to the animal shelter to volunteer. I'm so grateful that she goes and takes care of those cats. I'm so thankful that she does it. That is her passion. She cares so much about animal rights. I'm so thankful. But that's not my journey, and that's not my path. And so I've had to come to find what my path is and to feel comfortable in that. And so that's one thing I'd encourage. I think it's wonderful that they do these lecture series, and you can get ideas and things from people, and then follow your own path. And so I want to tell you about a woman who did follow her own path and what she's doing. Her name's Mrs. Chola, and she works at the community center that I talked about earlier, Buafano. She was actually working as a community nurse at just a small community clinic, and in her own community. It was where she lived, and she was working there. This community, there are not paved roads. The healthcare system is not good. And so she saw the desperate needs of her community. In this community, they have 30 to 40% of people have AIDS. And so there's a tremendous problem with child-headed households, widows taking care of children, sick parents who are dying. And she saw this need, and she said, the way she describes it is she felt a burden in her heart. She decided she had to do something. That she working at a clinic as a community nurse just wasn't going to cut this burden. She just continued to feel this burden in her heart. So what she did was she started out as one person, and she started making home visits. She started a community-based program, with an outreach program. And pretty soon she got some volunteers from the community who said, we want to help too. And then they started, and they've grown and grown and grown, and in just a few years' time, they now have a community school, and this is actually one of the classrooms. You can see it's actually an outdoor classroom with a thatched roof. They have about 500 to 600 children enrolled in primary school there. They're sponsoring children from the primary school to go to a secondary school. They have a medical outreach program where patients who are too sick to go to the medical clinic are seen by nurses in the community. They have, they support child-headed households. Because of the AIDS pandemic, there are many children who are raising their younger siblings. So they help to support those programs so that those children that are heading the household have opportunities for education. And then they also have a nutrition program that's supported by the World Food Program, and they feed 1 meal a day to about 300 children. Some of those children, it will be the only meal they have. So Mrs. Chola, who was one, has now grown into this tremendous program that is touching the lives of so many. And it's because she saw a need in her community and felt this burden in her heart and decided that she wanted to do something about it. And I'm sure all of you sitting here at some point in your life have felt some kind of burden, whether it's for the cats at the animal shelter or the environment or street children. Whatever that is, I would just encourage you to follow that, because it's there for a reason, and you may not have to open 4 centers and feed 300 children a day to address that and lift that burden. But Mrs. Chola is such a wonderful example. I love to see her because she felt that burden in her heart and decided to do something about it. One other person that I just wanted to highlight that is the same is Charity Malanga. This is actually Charity's sister. I couldn't find a picture of Charity. I have one somewhere, but I couldn't find it. So this is actually her sister, and then her sister's husband. He's actually the district president in Zambia, first district president in Zambia. So whenever I sit with him, I feel like I'm sitting with Brigham Young or something, because he's historic. I love it. Anyway, so they're a wonderful family. But Charity works at the University Teaching Hospital, and the University Teaching Hospital, it's the main hospital in Lusaka. She works in the newborn ICU, and she works, usually there's about 80 to 90 babies on that floor, and 3 nurses if they're lucky, 2 on most days. Just to give you a comparison, at American Fork Hospital where I work, the newborn ICU, there's usually 1 nurse to 3 babies. So you're thinking 1 to 3 ratio to 1 to 30 to 50 ratio, and these are sick babies. And they don't have the support and the resources that we have here. So Charity works in this kind of environment. and she works day in and day out. She is not paid well, and she is an excellent nurse. If any of you are in the medical field, you know that excellent nurses, even internationally, are sought after. She would have many opportunities to go pretty much anywhere in the world that she wanted because she's such an excellent nurse. She has excellent clinical skills. She has excellent clinical skills because she has no resources. When you don't have, when all you have is you come up with really good ways to save lives. When all you have is you. She is just, she's fabulous, and she's underpaid. She does not get paid well. And she cares for the emotional and physical needs of the moms and babies on that unit. I just want to share a little bit with you from Stephen Lewis wrote Race Against Time about some of his experiences in Zambia. And he actually visited the University Teaching Hospital. And I just want to share a part of what he said so that you can get an idea of where charity works. He visited in 2003, and in 2003 there was a great famine in Zambia. And so when he visited, he said, it was at the height of famine, and every crib had 4 or 5 infants and toddlers crushed together between the raised slatted sides, most of them suffering extreme malnutrition or AIDS or both. Their bodies were so thin that it was legitimate to ask, how can they still be alive? Well, as it happens, not all of them were. Approximately 10 minutes into the visit, the walls of the ward vibrated with what only can be called an otherworldly wail, the like of which I have never heard before. I was stunned and convulsively spun around to find the source. There, kneeling by the side of a bed, embodying anguish and despair, rocking violently back and forth, was a young mother crazed by loss, watching a nurse firmly place a sheet over the body of an infant and take the child away. Incredible though it may seem, the exact episode was twice more repeated during my 40 minutes in the ward. It prompted no break in the pace of activity. It was commonplace. In the pediatric ward of the University Teaching Hospital in Lusaka, Zambia throughout 2003, nothing was more commonplace than death. So you can imagine the burden and responsibility that Charity bears every day as she goes to work. Not only is she responsible for the physical care of these babies, but she's responsible for the emotional care. They don't have a social worker there. So she's responsible for the emotional care of these moms who are losing babies. So she carries a great burden. And I've talked to her several times, and I asked her one day, I was hesitant to ask. I wasn't sure how to ask this question, but I was curious why she stayed. I mean, I'm thinking, you could work anywhere in the world you wanted. Why UTH in Lusaka? So one time we were having a discussion. She'd had an incredibly long day. She'd had, I think, 3 babies pass away that day. So I asked her, I said, gosh, it seems like it's a hard job. You're doing an amazing thing. I said, do you ever think that maybe you'd want to do something else? She said, oh, I've thought of it so many times. So many times I come home and think, I'm going somewhere else. I'm going to go to Japan. I'm going to go to the UK. I'm going to go to the US. So many times. She said, and then I think, but if I don't take care of them, who will? She's one of the best nurses in Zambia, and if she doesn't do it, who will? And I know that there are things for each of you that if you don't do them, who will? If my friend doesn't go to the cat hospital every week, who will? If I don't show up at my job as a social worker and work with a family who's losing a loved one, who will? And if you're not here, sitting here in school, gaining an education, who will? So I just wanted to divert for a minute from some of the other discussion just to emphasize that each of us have our own journey and seek to find what that is and find where your path is. So I wanted to tie in a little bit about some of the things that I learned through international study programs that have helped me in my career. Now, the thing about international study programs is I learned more from the experiences that I had than from any textbook or research paper I wrote or test I took. To be honest, I can't remember hardly the name of a textbook that I read while I was at BYU. But I do remember the faces and experiences and the knowledge and understanding that I gained from people that I met through my experiences. And it was actually the experiences that taught me so much. You know, when you read a textbook, really you're reading the experiences and knowledge and understanding of someone else. And that's, I think, what's the great thing about international study programs is that it really allows you to write your own textbook because you are experiencing it for yourself. And those lessons will be so much more deeply ingrained in your life, not only career, but in everything that you do, that it's much more powerful than reading a textbook. I don't know. Are there professors here who are assigning readings? I'm sorry. I read, though. I did read a lot while I was in college, I'm sure, and it helped me, I'm sure. So Mothers Without Borders, some of the things that I learned in international study programs that has helped me so much in my work with Mothers Without Borders is the first would have to be cultural sensitivity. There's a saying in the Talmud that says, a teaching that says, we don't see things as they really are, we see things as we are. Isn't that true? We don't see things as they really are. We see things as we are. I have this paradigm, and when I go somewhere, it's so ingrained in who I am that it's hard to even recognize that it's there, because I just see things the way that I think they are, but really it's just the way that I see that they are, and actually other people are probably seeing them much differently. And culturally, that is so true. Sometimes I've seen even myself be frustrated, sometimes by cultural differences. And when I step back from myself, I realize really I'm looking through green glasses and they're looking through red glasses. We're seeing the same thing, we're just describing it differently. We're seeing it differently. And so when I can step back and realize that, it can bring such sensitivity and insight into what we're doing there. And that's been really helpful in Mothers Without Borders, because when we take a team of 20 over, we want to be so sensitive to the culture and to respect the local wisdom that's there. So that's been one thing that's really helped me. The second thing, let's see. Sorry, I kind of messed up my notes here, so now I'm relying on the second thing is communication. You learn quickly on an international program that verbal communication is not the only way. And that is something that has been so helpful for me in my career as a social worker at a hospital. So helpful. Because when something's wrong, my tendency is I kind of have emotional vomit, so I just want to talk to fix it. And sometimes verbal communication is not the only way. So it reminded me, when I was in Cambodia, there was a 14-year-old boy who was we stayed with a family, and there was a 14-year-old boy there. And he obviously spoke Khmer, which I spoke none of. So he was trying to teach me how to count. And obviously I wasn't getting the accent right, so he came up with the solution. He got out a chalkboard and started writing down in Khmer and pointing so that I would know how to say it, but it was in Khmer characters, so that was of no help to me. So there was some frustration there, but the one way we could communicate was through badminton. Now, I know this sounds strange, but in Cambodia, and I thought it strange myself, Cambodia, we're living in this thatched, roofed, on poles home, small home, and in the back of the house, in all of these trees, and they've got monkeys there too, they've got a badminton net. I mean, who knows? Anyway, I don't know where it came from, but they had a badminton net there. So we would go out, and for hours we would play badminton, because that was the only way we could communicate. That was the only thing we could do together and have fun. And it was just such a wonderful thing. And I ended up having this great relationship with this 14-year-old boy. And all I could do was count to 10. And he didn't speak any English, but we could play badminton together. And so that's one thing that has been so powerful for me, is that communication is not just verbal. There are so many other ways. The next thing is that's been so powerful for me is again building relationships, and I've already touched on this, that some of the greatest relationships not only are with those who I went on programs with, but those in Zambia and the Philippines. I still hear from friends there, and so wonderful to have friends all over the world where we help each other. And then leadership in international study programs, I think I gained some really valuable leadership skills. I remember, Dave will remember this, when I was in South Africa, I was helping as a facilitator, although I'd never been to South Africa before. And one day a girl came to me and said some things, and then she said, so by the way, I'm going to another city 6 hours away all by myself, and that's where I'm going to live for the next 2 months. I was like, well, that's really nice, but it's one of the most dangerous cities in the world, and really I don't think it's such a great idea for you to go by yourself. And so it took some communicating and talking through these things with her until she came to a place. But looking back on that, I realized, it really wasn't about wanting to go to another city all by herself. It was about feeling completely helpless in a situation where you're surrounded with poverty and not knowing what to do with it, and wanting to say, I want out of here. This is hard. And so some of those things have been so valuable as I've been able to look at things in a different way and think, okay, what's this really about? Because sometimes things aren't really about what people say they're about. And then, of course, the foundations of international development. And like I said, I often come home with more questions than answers, but certainly taking Intro to International Development 220 was such a valuable class for me as I started to think about and formulate some of those questions that at least I could seek for answers for. So now I work as a social worker, and part of social work is committed to social justice and human rights. And certainly that instilled in me, those beginning experiences instilled in me that desire. I just wanted to, in making a tie with social work, because that's really what I do now, I wanted to share some things that linked specifically to social work through international programs. And I'll just go quickly through these. One is service. And certainly as you see others who, in my green glasses, in my view, have nothing, reaching out to serve others has been an amazing thing for me to carry with me. That no matter where we are in life, we always have something to give. It may not be something material, but we always have something to give. The street children's shelter in the Philippines, one day we went to a center for children who have mental retardation and developmental disabilities. And the street children helped during feeding time to feed these other children. It was one of the most touching experiences as I watched these children hardened by street life feeding other children. And so no matter where we are in life, we always have something to give. And in giving, we also receive. So that's been a beautiful lesson. And then, of course, social justice. This is one of the great ethics of social work. And in Cambodia, Dave mentioned sweatshop labor because I had quite a passion about that. And one of the men that we worked with at this partner organization actually dressed up as a woman and snuck into the sweatshop to try and get help some of the other women. And so in his desire for social justice in that situation, I love that he dressed up as a woman. I don't know how ethical that is, but sweatshops aren't ethical either. So always. Okay, we'll save that for another time. Dignity and worth of a person. Obviously, seeing people from all over the world and seeing that while perhaps my blessings and the things I have been blessed with in life may be very materialistic, there are people all over the world with amazing blessings that I can only seek my whole life to obtain. And so I learned such a great deal from that. And then just, again, the importance of human relationships. Just one of the last things I wanted to talk about was end of life care. In my work as a social worker now, I work with end of life care and grief counseling and helping patients and families prepare for this time period in their lives, sometimes on a daily basis, especially as we get into winter. It's almost always on a weekly basis. And I think a foundation for my preparation in helping families and patients work through end of life really came from some of my early international experiences. And again, this is Stephen Lewis. He says, "I was completely unprepared for the pervasiveness of death. It has shaken me to my core. I must admit that from time to time, the enveloping cloak of death, combined with the appalling paucity of response, has made me feel futile in the face of the pandemic. I never submit to those momentary lapses because futility leads nowhere. But the way in which death seeps into every crevice of life shifts one's view of the world." Here's a picture of a cemetery in Zambia. You can see that these are all fresh graves. The cemetery in Zambia, you can look as far as the eye can see, and there's grave upon grave. They're mounds. In fact, most of them don't even have a headstone, and they're young. They're born in the 70s, 60s, 80s. And so this really shifted my view of the world. And one of the first experiences I had in South Africa was visiting a woman who had developed breast cancer. And she had developed open sores on her chest. And so she went to a traditional healer who told her to pour battery acid on those sores to heal them. So you can imagine what that did. She was in tremendous pain. I stood in her home feeling absolutely helpless. I wanted to do something for her. I felt help. I couldn't even speak the language she spoke, and I felt so helpless. And then in the hospital, when I was just newly graduated, I was working, they asked me to visit a woman who was dying of cancer, 40-year-old woman with 8 children. I felt the same helpless feeling again. And through linking these experiences, I've realized that sometimes there's nothing to say. Sometimes there's nothing to do because there's nothing we can do. Sometimes just being is enough. That's why we're human beings, not human doings, right? Because sometimes just being has to be enough because there's nothing else to do. So as I've had other subsequent experiences in Zambia and at the hospital, I've tried to remember that sometimes just being is enough. I don't have to say anything. I don't have to know the right thing to say. I don't have to know the right thing to do. Sometimes just listening and being is enough. So I would encourage you I thank you for letting me share my experiences. It's not very often that I get to share experiences, and I love international study programs. I've had such a great time here, even we had ISP prom in this very room. So I've had a lot of great experiences with international study programs, and I hope that you, if that is your path, that you will follow it, and because there's some great opportunities here. So thanks. Are there any, I guess you want me to do questions?
Any questions? How was seeing all these situations, and how did you go away without heartbreaking every day? How did you go back, or how do you keep on going, type of thing?
Well, to say that I went away every day without heartbreak wouldn't be an accurate reflection, because there were many days. In fact, I remember Dr. Seipel, who works in social work, I had a discussion with him once, and I said, in some ways I should have just never left Pleasant Grove. It would have been a lot easier. And he said, yes, but not leaving, not leaving or you not knowing about it doesn't mean that it still exists. And so I think that's because I have had so many days of guilt and feeling helpless and all of those things. And I think the way that I found that has combated that the most, even though it's not completely resolved, is finding the balance in my life where I feel like I'm giving what I can and what's expected of me, and I feel comfortable in doing my part and knowing that the Lord will take care of the rest, and trusting that will be, and that if all together we're all doing our part in what's expected of us, then there is hope for change, even if it's small. I don't know.
When you were working with charity, what was your everyday, just everyday things that you would do to help her? What kind of things?
When we take volunteers to the hospital, we actually do a donation because it's difficult in the hospital to have volunteers unless volunteers are going to stay long-term to help her. We have had volunteers in the past do things like hold the babies, do feedings, help with changing, those kinds of things, just infant care kinds of things. They feed most of the children from cups rather than bottles, and trying to involve the moms in that. So we actually usually will, when we take a team of volunteers, we actually just do a visit to the hospital and make a donation because they need things like blankets and hygiene kits and infant kits.
So when you were doing the international study programs, what kinds of stuff would you do?
Well, at the Street Kids Shelter, we would do educational activities for the kids. So we would do math, and we would do recreation and English lessons for the kids there, and character development and cultural appreciation. When I was at Pangarup, the same kind of thing. I mean, I did cooking classes with the boys. That was really fun. And I would help them with their homework. We went on some recreation activities, so those kinds of things. And in Zimbabwe, we did a lot. Zimbabwe was sponsored by the recreation department, so we did a lot of therapeutic recreation kinds of things. So, and then in Cambodia, we were doing training, literacy training every day.
Last question.
I'm just curious where you found a lot of the opportunities to work international, but not year-round. The different places that you said that you had offers. Where did you find those? Because through job hunting and things, most of the things are local, obviously.
Yeah. That was one of the that was one thing that was difficult when I wanted to stay in international development, and yet at the same time, I didn't necessarily want to live abroad. Just at this time period of my life, it just wasn't the thing that was going to work for me. So actually, through some of the best way that I had opportunities was through networking, through international study programs. So because I had been on pro-literacy internship, then I knew the director, and so I had been involved with him. And through some of those experiences, then you know people who are in the field. But that is, something, I think there are a lot of opportunities, but it depends on how much you want to travel and if you want to live abroad and those kinds of things. And that's one thing that I really came to understand, was that for me, my journey wasn't to be involved in international development as a full-time job. I wanted to work in my own community but still be involved in that on a part-time basis. So,
just a follow-up. Did you? I'm doing social work, but it's
cool.
And so, is it possible still, if you haven't taken international classes and that's not part of the plan? Is it still possible to work internationally? I've been in other countries and done work there, but I don't have any class or educational experience as far as international. Does that make sense?
Well, and it's kind of like what I said before. I think experience is the greatest teacher. So if you've had experiences, that's going to be as worthwhile as a class.
So I feel so funny.
No, that's okay.
That having experience is enough to get you into that area.
I think having experience sets you apart as an applicant considerably. If you have language experience, then, there are plenty of opportunities. I have a friend who lives in Seattle and works with refugees, and she has no social work or international experience. She graduated in recreation therapy. So I think depending on what your background and skills are, there's a lot of opportunities, especially if you're interested in major cities in the U.S.